Good morning, everyone. As you can tell from our introduction music, you're in for a little bit of a twist for today. So we want to welcome everybody back to day 2 of NCO. We're really glad that you're with us. Did want to point out a couple of quick things. Something I failed to mention, and you may or may not have discovered this, but the very back portion of your manual is a section specifically for taking notes. So we would very much encourage you to follow along in your manual as we're going through the various sessions, and feel free to mark them up. A lot of the sections are in that PowerPoint, so you can take notes as the slides go. But for other presentations and for other sections, you might want to utilize that section in the back to take notes. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions? Anybody having any technical difficulties, anything like that? As you can see from a handful of us and from the chat, today is going to start out as Matrix Day. So feel free to play along. We're glad to have you with us. And without further ado, let me turn things over to our first amazing crew as they bring you the introduction to frameworks.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Matrix, the FRYSC Matrix. I am Naila Imanyar Sirakali, Region 3A Program Manager, and I am joined by Andrea Pike Goff, 3B Regional Program Manager, and Sherry Von Martin, Region 11 Program Manager. And we're going to talk about our FRYSC frameworks. So the FRYSC program operates within the context of these models you see on your screen: the Kentucky Strengthening Families, Principles of Family Support, and Standards of Program Quality. So our intentions today is just to give you a brief overview of these concepts. So you may already be familiar with a couple of them, or you may not. But we will give you a brief overview, and then later on in your tenure with FRYSC, we will give you a more in-depth training on each of these topics. So we really just want you to sit back and become a sponge, and we want you to just absorb this information and really this is an opportunity to see if you really, you say you want to be a FRYSC coordinator. This is an opportunity to see if you really want to be a FRYSC coordinator, because you are, during this NCO, going to be getting a lot of information. So without further ado, we welcome you again to the FRYSC Matrix. We want to show you a short clip from the movie. If I don't know, can people just put in the chat whether you've seen this movie or not? Just say yes, no. I don't know how many people have seen it. Some people haven't. So I see some no's popping up. Okay. So I'm going to set this little clip up. In this clip, it stars Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne, and Neo is actually a computer hacker. And he's been singled out because he is like phenomenal computer hacker. And Lawrence Fishburne, whose role is Morpheus, they single out Neo and want him to join with them and for him to free his mind. So he's being challenged to take the pill that will free his mind, the red pill, or stay in the matrix of just illusion. And that is by taking the blue pill. So that's what we're saying to you all. Are y'all going to stay in the blue pill of illusion? Or are you going to take the red pill and step into the FRYSC matrix? So here we go.
I will warn you that the audio is a little bit low, so you probably will want to turn up your speakers.
This is it. Let me give you one piece of advice. Be honest. He knows more than you can imagine.
At last. Welcome, Neo. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus.
It's an honor to meet you.
No, the honor is mine. Please, come, sit. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neo?
No,
Why not?
because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You take the red, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me. Hey, Pac, are we online?
Almost.
Time is always against us. Please, take a seat there.
All right. Thank you, Greg. So I got chills just watching that. If you haven't seen that movie, the trilogy actually is a trilogy. I think it's 3. Check it out. But today for us, this is setting up our FRYSC matrix. The FRYSC program, next slide, please. As I mentioned before, is built on these foundational principles and the first foundational frameworks. And the first framework we're going to discuss is principles of family support. Next slide. So the first principle of family support is staff and families work together in relationships based on equality and respect. Now, I'm just going to say this off, just off the script, is that a lot of this information is not new information. However, these frameworks are information that we have used to help establish and solidify our program, and these are the bases upon which we have grown from and into. So while this principle itself may not seem so revolutionary today, at the time it was written, it presented quite a challenge to the system, because at the time the prevailing wisdom was that staff were experts, people with degrees and education and all the knowledge. They came to fix people, right? Fix people, fix the problem. We knew best. But as time went on, this principle challenged the notion by saying that staff families are equal. And as staff, we do come to the table with our education, our knowledge, and our experience, but the families also bring their own strengths and resources and are the most knowledgeable about their past experience. It is by working as partners in relationships, as we talked about yesterday, relationships based on equality and respect, that we all achieve the best outcomes for the family together. Prior to becoming a FRYSC regional program manager, I worked for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services as CPS investigator, and that was one of the biggest things that I always, you know, my work ethics was respecting the people that I even did investigations on, because that is crucial. No matter what their economic situation or their background is, that's all people are asking. You don't have to like me, but you do have to respect me. So that is crucial. Next. Number two, staff enhances families' capacity to support the growth and development of all family members, adults, youth, and children. This principle emphasizes that we in the family support field look at the whole family. And that's nothing new to us. We've always done that. Look at the whole family, not just the individual. If you're working with a student, chances are you're going to be working with potentially the parents and other siblings. So we work with the whole family. If only one member of the family participates in our activity, we want to be asking about and inviting other members of the family as well. We know that when multiple family members are involved, the family will more likely have a better outcome. Next slide, please. So number three, families are resources to their own members, to other families, to programs, and the community. Unique to family support perspective is that we do not see staff as having all the answers or doing all the work to support families. Families themselves are encouraged to support other family members. There is a strong emphasis on connecting families to share resources and information and build networks of peer support. And we've done this through our parent cafes and other intentional activities designed to increase social connections. Next, please. Number four, programs affirm and strengthen families' cultural, racial, and linguistic identities and enhance their ability to function in a multicultural society. This principle is commonly referred to as the diversity principle and has two equally important parts. The first is about the respecting and working with the diversity that families bring. The second part is about preparing them for a connection with the larger community where they will interact with people different from themselves. This will support them to fully participate in the diverse society in which we live and navigate what we call the dynamics of difference. So, if you work in a community that does not have much racial diversity, which we talk a lot about that, you still will want to have conversations regarding racial equity, to prepare your students and family members when they engage with others outside of their familiar, outside of their community. Number 5, programs are embedded in their communities and contribute to the community building process. Family support programs do not see themselves as simply social service providers. Um, we really worked hard in not being just the people who giving out underwear and socks and doing those social service type things, but as community builders as well. By strengthening families, they make a key contribution to the health of the community. They also work to develop families' responsibility and leadership for strengthening and building their communities. Um, and in this picture shows kind of a project in another community where you see it's an intergenerational interaction here, where you potentially could have a grandparent or a parent or a foster parent, interacting with a student. Number 6, programs advocate with families for services and systems that are fair, responsive, and accountable to the families they serve. Are systems fair? Think about that question. Are systems fair, responsive, and accountable to the families they serve? Are they? Think about it. Think about the systems that we know. Are they fair? Are they accountable? Generally, they are not. That's where our work comes in as family support providers, to work with families to help improve these systems to better serve them. This is an example of family support as a shift. I'll say that again. This is an example of family support as a shift in human service delivery and a movement for social change. And this concept is played out in Jefferson County in terms of with the neighborhood place concept, that one stop where we have, all the different agencies represented together and they're all working together and, to create a common goal of lifting and supporting the family, because it does take a village to raise a child. It takes all of us. Next slide, please. Number 7, practitioners work with families to mobilize formal and informal resources to support family development. This principle highlights the strong emphasis in the family support field on resources. If you look around the country, we see that most common types of family support programs is called a family resource center. I think we may be one of the few that are really school-based. Most of the family resource centers are community-based. Their buildings and their actual physical structure is in the community. But as you see right here in the name, Family Resource Center, we put this emphasis intentionally on resources. And while no one program could possibly directly provide all the resources that families may need, it is our responsibility to know how to connect them to the resources needed. So I know we used to say a brokerage of services. If that service is not being provided, we expect for you to step in and potentially, gather some other community members together and make that happen for your community. And a lot of coordinators, you talk to a lot of veteran coordinators, they've done just that. You don't have to be the only person, doing everything all the time. So we want you to work with the community, work with the other partners within the community. Next. Number 8, programs are flexible and continually responsive to emerging family and community issues. This concept of flexibility is very important because neighborhoods and communities change. Your school community is going to change. from year to year, sometimes from months, because some people have so many transit students in, it could change from month to month. But if your county could be, majority Caucasian one day, and then the next it could be majority Latino in the next 5 years. So you really got to stay up on the continual, you have to be flexible and stay up on the changes, the continual changes. So, as issues come up, you have to be able to react. And we've shown how well we were able to do that during this pandemic. Right now, we're having a virtual training. We had to switch and get this going quick. I mean, we had never done NCO and RCO and all of these other trainings and meetings and stuff virtually. We had to be reactive. We had to be flexible and be responsive to the needs of our families. We had to get you all information. You all had to get the information out to your families. So I think we've really shown how we've gotten this. We've mastered this, and we're continuing to improve on this and have done an exceptional job. So, it goes without saying that our programs need to be flexible and responsive to these changes. In this picture, this person is doing a survey of the community. Again, as you move along and understand about our foundational frameworks, some of this information was pulled out from California, and most of the resource centers were community based. And so this man in this picture is doing a community survey. You will have to do a survey of your community, which will be your schools. Number 9, principles of family support are modeled in all program activities, including planning, governance, and administration. This is the catch-all, what we call the catch-all principle, because it says that all of the above principles should be applied in everything you do. Planning, your programs and activities, governance, working with your advisory council and establishing which programs and activities you're going to do and provide, and administration. These principles have implications to how we develop our programs, how they are led, and how we support our staff, and how we as a division support you all. These principles provide a foundation for the standards of quality that we will review further in this presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Sherry.
Thank you, Naila. The next framework, the second framework that the FRYSC program operates in, is the Kentucky Strengthening Families model. So I'm sure you've heard about strengthening families in someplace or another. So what is it? Let's talk about what it is. So nationally, the Strengthening Families model was developed in response to an amazing landmark study on adverse childhood experiences. It was called the ACEs study, and you may have heard of ACEs. And my RPM friend Andrea is going to give you some more information about this fascinating study in a little bit. So they wanted to develop something in response to the ACEs study, which clearly showed that children who experienced trauma early in their life suffered from mental, behavioral, physical challenges later in life. And the thought was, what can we do to arm children and families? What can we do to protect them? What can we do to prevent child abuse and neglect? So the Center for the Study of Social Policy out of Washington, D.C., developed the Strengthening Families model, and they came up with 6 protective factors. And they said when these 6 protective factors are in place in a family, that the likelihood of child and abuse and neglect goes way down, and the likelihood of child youth health and well-being and success in life goes up. Next slide, please. And let me say that this is just a brief overview of the Strengthening Families model. This is so key to our work. This is really what we're all about at the core. That you will learn more about them. You will have a full training on the Kentucky Strengthening Families and Family Thrive model when you come back as a returning coordinators orientation in September. So strengthening families. So it's not adding, we're not adding work to your already full plate, but strengthening family enhances your work to make what you're already doing more effective and to allow for better outcomes and more change in families. It's not a replacement program, and it's not a new initiative. It's more about connecting the things that you're already doing and that you already have in place to be more intentional about building those protective factors and making sure families and kids have them. The Strengthening Families model in Kentucky jumped on board about 6-7 years ago, along with many other states that had adopted the Strengthening Family model for them, for their state also. And they wanted to have it, they wanted to use it as a framework for all agencies who work with children and families so that we would have a common language, so that we would have a common goal, and we would have a common approach to working with families. So if you go to DCBS, you're talking with a DCBS person, and you mention protective factors, they're going to know what you're talking about. And if you go to the health department and you mention protective factors, they're going to know what you're talking about. If you go to your local United Way and talk about protective factors, they're going to know what you're talking about. So we do have a common language and a common approach. So the strengthening, the folks that in Kentucky who built the model for Kentucky, I'd say, they like to say it is making, strengthening families is making the invisible visible and the visible more intentional. So what does that mean? Well, protective factors are really an invisible thing, right? So we want to bring forward the core of our work. We want to bring those protective factors to light, make them visible, and then be more intentional about helping families get them by making sure that we are embedding them in everything that we do with children, with youth, and with families. So in a nutshell, strengthening families is the work we will do to build protective factors in families, children, and youth to build resilience so that negative life experiences won't be debilitating for them. So let's look at what the 6 protective factors are. Now, when they were first developed by the Center for the Study of Social Policy, they developed 5. So Kentucky is so awesome that we added a 6th protective factor. Excuse me. So the first protective factor is parental resilience. We'll go around the tree, starting at the bottom left. Parental resilience means families bounce back in the face of adversity. Social connections, families get strength from having connections with other people, and they have a source of support. Knowledge of child development, that's an obvious one. We know that we help families learn what's normal behavior, what's not normal, which goes a long way for preventing child abuse. Concrete supports in times of need. That one's obvious to us too because we do that a lot. Social emotional competence of children. That is us helping families learn how to help their children manage their emotions. and build healthy relationships. And then this is the one Kentucky added because they felt it was so important. And I definitely agree. I think you will too. Nurturing and attachment, where children know that they are loved and safe. So again, when these 6 protective factors are present, regardless of the number of risk factors present in a child's life, and you know there are risk factors that children and youth are experiencing, exposed to, that they live, that we can't do anything about. But, so regardless of the number of risk factors, when these 6 protective factors are present, we know that maltreatment is greatly reduced and children are more ready for school, they're more healthy, it's optimal development, and the family is stronger. A little more about protective factors. Protective factors on the next slide. It's like the flip side of a risk factor. It's a characteristic that makes a parent, child, or family more likely to thrive and less likely to experience negative outcomes to whatever challenges they face. And protective factors help children and families thrive despite whatever risk factors they do face. Next slide, please. So here's where we come in. Protective factors can be built through interaction with people and systems that family encounter in their day-to-day lives. So this is what we do. We are part of the people and the systems that families encounter in their day-to-day lives, and how we interact with families, what we do with them, and what we do with youth will help strengthen protective factors and help build those so that we can hopefully give those children, those youth, those families some resilience to face those negative experiences in life. So now we have a video clip for you that will show you or explain a little bit about why we wanted to adopt the Kentucky Strengthening Families model.
Research has proven that positive experiences in our earliest years actually help build brain architecture. So does that mean negative experiences can weaken brain architecture? The answer is yes, and the culprit is certain kinds of stress. The body and brain respond to stress by raising the heartbeat, pumping out adrenaline, and sending out stress hormones like cortisol, preparing us to act in a crisis. One kind of stress, called positive stress, is beneficial. It's normal and healthy for children to face challenges like meeting new people or attending the first day of school. The stress responses triggered by these events are usually short and not too severe. This kind of stress is positive because it prepares the brain and body for stressful situations later in life.
There are kind of these multiple phases of stress. So we have kind of what we call good stress, which is this kind of controllable stress in our lives, things like studying for a test, solving a problem. At the time we may not like them, but the reality of it is that we grow from them, we develop adaptive coping skills, and they kind of benefit us in the long run.
Children surrounded by caring adults experience positive stress in ways that benefit and strengthen their brain architecture. It's how we prepare our brains and bodies for other stressful events that we will experience throughout life. Sometimes children face more serious events. Think of a bad accident or a tragedy like a death in the family or a natural disaster. These events can cause a more severe stress response with the potential to last a long time and come back often. Support from caregivers can buffer the severity of the stress response and help keep stress levels under control. If the stress is kept in check, it won't do lasting damage to the child's brain and body. That's called tolerable stress.
And so this is things that are bad, but they're the kind of things we can't avoid, like the death of our parents or moving away from home, things that everyone goes through. And they're not positive. They're kind of negative in value, but they're the kind of things that everyone goes through. We can all kind of support each other, and they're made a lot easier by support networks and, coping skills and stuff like that.
The attention and support of caregivers prevents tolerable stress from causing lasting harm to developing brains. A third kind of stress is called toxic stress. It occurs during repeated exposure to bad situations like abuse, neglect, or serious hardship. If no supportive adults are around to help buffer the stress response, the hormone levels stay dangerously high. Severe stress is especially toxic if it occurs often and lingers for a long time. That can have a negative impact on brain architecture and on other systems in the body. Toxic stress can cause serious health problems later in life.
These are things that are like pervasive, typically very uncontrollable and unpredictable. Abusive relationships, poverty, loss of job, loss of social status, things like this, which are kind of beyond our control and are very pervasive in our life and really kind of have this detrimental effect on us.
Toxic stress can weaken developing brain architecture and damage other body systems in young children. The effects can be a lifetime of health challenges, including physical and mental health problems, and even addiction. To ensure a healthier future for our families and communities, we need to work together to support caregivers and children, prevent toxic stress, and provide the kinds of nurturing experiences that build healthy brains and bodies.
So I'd like to debrief that video just a little bit because it's one of the first times I think I've watched it meaningfully since we have been through COVID. That big block that was considered tolerable stress, the death of a parent or a natural disaster or another upsetting factor that you kind of lean into and gather strength from others. Gosh, I think we have to realize that some of our kids have been through so much of that during this time of the pandemic. Things that we would have considered were tolerable stress and they can bounce back from with a little extra support, I think are going to be more in that dangerous column now, more damaging, more long-term effects than we previously had thought of those things. I can think of kids I know right now who have lost a loved one to COVID, have suffered through a major flood, and then have had the stress of being at home every day outside their normal routine. They've been in a lot of stress, like their caregivers have. And so I think it's important that we take a moment to realize that some of our kids coming back to school to us are coming with neuro damage now. Kids who were functioning at a fairly stable level before are going to be coming back to us with toxic levels of stress. And so that's a little debrief there I didn't normally think of with that video, but gosh, I think we have to be aware that we're in a different field now. And so along those lines, Greg, I'm ready to advance. I just wanted to give some thought to that. We're going to talk about the ACEs study because our kids have definitely been suffering ACEs now. We all have. And so this ACEs study, ACEs is Adverse Childhood Experiences, was a study that was conducted over a long term with 18,000 middle-class enrollees. These were just regular people coming in for routine well-being physicals who answered a survey, an ACEs survey about childhood experiences they had that were traumatic. So it's important to remember that this was voluntary and it was just a random grouping. These weren't people who were identified as having trouble, as having significant mental health issues. None of that, just everyday people like you and I. If we went in for our yearly exam and we filled out this survey, it's what they were finding. So, and that was the group they purposely wanted to draw from because they wanted to see how widespread it was. So they just used a standardized study where they ticked off things that happened to them during their childhood: physical abuse, emotional abuse, domestic violence, substance abuse in the home, mental illness in a parent, loss of a parent due to separation, divorce, or death, and or household member in jail, which again is kind of that separation with an extra layer to it. And with this information, they kind of found a baseline to study, and they found that the childhood experiences affected long-term adulthood, or a success in adulthood ongoing for continually. It's important to realize that we all of our families have ACEs. Most of us will have experienced one or two at some point in our childhood. If you haven't ever completed an ACEs study or an ACEs checkoff form, I would recommend you Google that and find one and just do it for yourself, or do it for your kids' perspective, just to get an idea of what it looks like, of what things might be considered ACEs. Because there are sometimes things that you wouldn't immediately think of that it's important to recognize. So next slide, please. So when we studied these ACEs, we found that 54% of adult depression, 58% of suicide attempts, 39% of ever smoking, 26% of current smoking, 65% of alcoholism, 50% of drug abuse, 78% of IV drug abuse, and 48% of promiscuity are attributable to ACEs. And as I was learning about this, the thing that blew my mind, what they considered promiscuity, was 50 or more partners. So we're not talking run-of-the-mill teenage exploration here. We're talking serious promiscuity. 48% attributable to ACEs. So we just know that the long-term effect is ongoing. And we also know that sometimes we see a few of these things manifest together. Sometimes people who are depressed also have alcoholism or other drug abuse. When we see those things manifest together, we can be pretty sure that they're attributable to ACEs, that the adult who's exhibiting many of these behaviors has several things that coincided with that, were morbidity in their childhood. And we know that it's important when we see that very dysfunctional adult, the person who shows up at your center, at your school, and everybody's going, oh, they're probably going back to that childhood trauma. And so our goal is, to help those adults when they show up, but it's also to build in our protective factors and our family strengthening model to help mitigate some of that in the children we have now, so that we won't see it so much when they're adults. Greg, if you'll advance, please. Thank you. So it's important to remember that our protective factors are trying to balance out those risk factors that we have no control over. We can't stop what that child has already experienced, but we can try to plug in enough protective factors now to balance those scales. If any of you have ever been involved in a filling the bucket campaign where we try to give enough good tokens, enough positive compliments to balance out the negative things people are experiencing, that's really the model we're trying to use with our protective factors. We're trying to build in enough resiliency in that child and that family and that community, that school, that we balance out the negative factors that they've already experienced or that are going to be coming into their life that we can't prevent. We couldn't prevent COVID, had no idea how to stop that when it first started. We couldn't prevent the flooding that attacked the communities in Eastern Kentucky. We can't prevent all of the violence that might be going on in the community of where your children live. But we can try to mitigate it by filling that bucket, by providing enough positive experiences that we're providing a strong structure for that family, for those children in that school. So Greg, I think we're ready. We're going to advance and we're going to talk about doing our work within the Strengthening Families framework. all FRYSC activities, everything you're doing is going to be an opportunity to build protective factors. We're going to be building those with the families. We're going to be supporting the family structure. We're going to be empowering families to do things that are good for them. So it's important to remember to be intentional. It's back to making that invisible visible and making the visible intentional. So when you're planning an activity, don't just throw a whole bunch of things out there and hope that something sticks. It's part of that needs assessment. And we're going to be talking about this on further today about how we design our components. All of this is carefully laid out in the matrix to help you design a strong program that presents lots of opportunities for our families and our schools to build those protective factors. Yeah, I think I'm going to pass it back to Naila.
Naila, you're on mute.
Sorry. So keywords that you probably heard is intentional. You will hear that. That's a buzzword, and resilience is another buzzword. Just kind of make you aware of that. So if you notice in the chat, I had Greg to put our vision statement in the chat. And if you would read over that. The vision statement, the Kentucky Division of Family Resource Youth Service Centers for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services shall sustain the national standard of excellence in the provision of school-based family support through continuous quality improvement. So that's where the standards of quality come in. Next slide. In 2018, next slide, please. In 2018, our office adopted the standards of quality for family strengthening and support. These standards were developed by the National Family Support Network as a way to help practitioners like us have a shared definition of what a quality program looks like. This is an ongoing process. Let me say it again. This is an ongoing process. These standards can guide us in continuous improvement of our program. So, standards of quality, why? Because it defines and promotes quality practice. It puts our field in the same league as others. It gives us a shared language. Educators, they understand standards and indicators. They know that language. It ensures that families are supported, which is the most important, and it integrates and operationalizes the principles of family support with the strengthening families approach. Next slide. So there are, within the standards of quality, there's 5 sections and 17 standards and 27 indicator pairs. Don't let that scare you. We will go through that in depth at another training. But they are divided, like I said, into these 5 sections: family centeredness, working with a family centered approach that values and recognizes families as integral to the program; family strengthening, utilizing a family strengthening approach to support families to be strong, healthy, and safe, thereby promoting their optimal development; embracing diversity, acknowledging and respecting families' diversity, supporting their participation in a diverse society, as well as engaging in ongoing learning and adaptation to diversity; community building, contributing to building a strong and family community by facilitating family social connections, developing their leadership skills, and by collaborating with other programs; and last but certainly not least, evaluation, looking at areas of program strength as well as areas for further development in order to guide continuous quality improvement and achieve positive results for families. So if you're thinking, that sounds like the principles of family support that I was talking about at the beginning of this, you are correct, because our standards were built off the principles of family support and strengthening families approach. So you're going to hear that same language over and over and over until it finally gets into you and it's stuck. And you get it. You'll be like me. You could just rattle it off the top of your head. I can just do this off the top of my head, really, because I've done it so many times. I've heard this language so much, but I truly embrace this language because, as Sherry had mentioned, this is nothing we're asking you to do. It's just a way of thinking and a way of how you will always process when you start planning and doing your programs. So I'm going to throw it back over to Andrea to close us out.
Andrea, you're on mute as well.
I know it's hard to keep up with that.
You would think after a year of this, I would quit doing that. Sorry about that. So we want you to know that we don't expect you to be experts in this today. We expect this to have just been an introduction, something to kind of keep in mind as you're growing and learning, maybe to make you look after other professional development opportunities, because these standards really are important to our work. The standards of quality you're going to learn more about next fall. It's going to the principles of family support and strengthening families. Again, you're going to have more in part 2 when we come back for RCO. What we want you to remember, though, is this is going to be the way you approach your work. This is going to be, we ask you to step into our matrix and to believe these things, because we realize you function in schools where not all of your partners have had this kind of training. They might understand that the family is important, and we are seeing that more and more family involvement, more family engagement activities. But often from their standpoint, it's more of a broadcast. We invite everybody and we just throw the stuff out there and we see what happens. We're asking your role to be more intentional, more thought through, more making that an intentional part of your programming. So we want to ask you, do you choose the blue pill and go on, or do you take the red pill and join us in the matrix?
Are there any questions? Comments?
Greg's going to be sending those out. You're all so quiet. Oh.
Greg's offering you a red pill.
Oh, he's on mute too.
Yeah,
yay. It's all the way around today. Everybody's had an opportunity.
There you go. There's exactly one choice. Welcome to the matrix.
Hey, I see some people saying yes, they accept the red pill. Yay! We're so happy to have you over on this side.
Absolutely.
And I want to also say that nobody in your, probably not very few. I mean, there are a few principals that get this job, but nobody else can really tell you what your role or your job is, because nobody else does it but you in your school. So this is your community. This is, we have this community built and this matrix built for you to support you in your job. So anytime you need any of us, you can use each other. This is your family support system within our organization. So that's why we always say you join the FRYSC family. So we're here to support you as well. So we appreciate you all being here and being attentive. So does anybody have any questions?
Kyla, if I could highlight, to me, this is a really good transition point for them to realize today was specifically designed to understand these foundations before we pull in the components that you've inherited from your previous coordinator, from whoever wrote that CPP, so that you can have an understanding of why we do the things we do, that it's not just a broadcast effort to, I saw a magician and I liked him, so I thought I'd put him in here. And then I met this lady at a conference and I liked what she said, so I put her in there. It's an intentional plan for how we're going to support families and remove those non-cognitive barriers to learning by that family support piece. So I just, wanted to give people a chance to appreciate that.
Yes. So we're very intentional in everything that we design for you all. So just like I said, when you all do your programs and activities, be very intentional. How is it going to connect families? How is this activity really going to remove barriers to learning? How is this program going to, and just put some more thought into it instead of, like Andrea said, I just thought I'd do this because it seemed fun,
because my friends
may be
doing it, and
you have some fun things, but intentionally say, this is why I'm doing this. So you are really being very thoughtful in your planning. So
thanks for having fun with us today with the matrix.
Yeah.
Yes.
Couple minutes.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Matrix crew. Like we've said many times, welcome to day 2. So very quickly, you should see our schedule for today. We are going to take a quick break, so use the restrooms, fill up your coffee, and we'll meet back here in about 5 minutes, and we'll kick off the beginning of the core components. And so that'll start at 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Central. We'll see you back in 5 minutes.
Be sure you guys have your core components with you. If you don't have them, you want to access them, make sure for the next session, okay?